So in today's video, I thought I'd show you my top 10 things that I think you definitely need to start spring off. It's things you can buy, repurpose, salvage or recycle. Let's go. So number one on the list is nets, cloches, hoops and structures that you might need to start yourself off in spring, because not only do you need nets later on for things like allium leaf miner and other pests as well, like squirrels, pigeons, butterflies, you name it. Nets, I think, are vital for growing food in your garden. Now, these hoops are from First Tunnels and they are an investment. They were something that I just didn't know what I wanted for Christmas and birthday, so every time I'd ask my family just to buy me a hoop or two, and that's how I built up my collection. So don't think you need to buy them all at once, because they are, like you said, an investment. These last forever. They're strong and sturdy and they don't rust or break or buckle. But if you didn't want to do that, you can do other things as well, like use piping. I know some people can buy the blue piping. In the UK, I've sourced it in a shop called Screwfix. I'll put a link in the description for it. Cut it to length, and then you can either push some poles or some bean canes, cut off into 2-foot lengths, hammer them in situ, and then fold the hoops over the top as well, and then put your nets over the top. Now that is one option, but I use, like I said, these ones from First Tunnels, and I use a white net, which I am going to be changing later on, but I'll mention that in a future video. Now, if you're new to gardening, you're probably wondering, why do I need to net it? Because, you know, you'll see those plot tours and garden tours and there is no nets, or they're not showing as many nets as they really are using. And that's mainly because they'll quickly take them off, film everything they do, and then scramble to put those nets back on, because in spring and summer we have cabbage butterfly whites and they are absolute nightmare. They will actually land on top of your brassicas, leave loads of eggs underneath the leaves, and then later on you get those little caterpillars that will decimate your crops. So please don't think that you don't need nets, because you 100% do. And also we have things like I mentioned, allium leaf miner, which also will come over in the early spring and then later summer as well, and decimate your alliums, your onions, your garlic, especially your leeks. So you need to be netting them. So my onions, garlics and leeks will all be netted at the start of spring before that season commences. Now, the good thing also about using these hoops is that you can actually change the actual material that you use on these hoops. So at the moment I've got nets, you can also take them off and put a fleece over the top to try and protect them from frosts. Now, early spring, when you've got your potatoes in and some delicate crops that you've kind of pushed a little bit and put in the ground maybe a few weeks early, you can fleece them over if we're having an overnight frost, and that could protect them from getting frost damage all over their leaves. And thirdly, you can use plastic as well to form like a cloche system. Now, if you haven't got cloches, you can actually make your own by putting bits of plastic over some hoops or over a wooden frame or plastic frame. And again, that keeps out some of the elements, because we might have too much wind, too much rain, and also, like I said, pests. Like pigeons. Pigeons are an absolute nightmare as well, because there isn't many crops, there isn't much food around in autumn and winter. So they come over to your garden looking for something to eat, and the first thing they take out is the delicate leaves like brassicas, lettuces and things like that. So you definitely need cloches and nets in my eyes. Now, number 2 on my list is compost. Now, whether or not you're dig or no dig, you will need to buy some compost, whether it's for sowing seeds in or mulching beds or topping up beds. Now, I am mainly no dig, but I have got some dig areas as well, which I actually put compost on and dig back into the soil to add some feed and nutrient back to that growing matter. Now, this one is called Vitax Q4, and I mean, it's an absolute beautiful compost. But I actually use this for sowing seeds in as well, because it's very, very fine. And you can buy other compost, but make sure if you are sowing seeds into it, make sure you sift it so it's nice and fine, giving those seeds that extra help to go and push through that soil. The last thing you want is to sow loads of seeds and there's loads of bark in there, and it hits that bark on the way up and ends up dying and rotting underneath the soil. So sift your soil if it's not fine, and yeah, start sowing. But in my eyes, you definitely need to be buying some compost for now, and trust me, compost will probably be the thing that you'll spend a lot of money on, especially if you're a new grower, especially for filling up beds and top dressing beds as well. Now, I've top dressed these only about 2 or 3 inches, and this now will feed the soil underneath and also feed all the plants that are growing in you through early spring. Now, compost isn't only needed for top dressing beds, for filling raised beds up, and also for sowing seeds. You'll also need it for potting on, and if it's the start of spring, you will definitely need it for potting on tomatoes, chilies, aubergines, cucumbers, brassicas, you name it. Spring, you will see those bags of compost going into your polytunnel, into your shed, into your greenhouse, and coming out an empty bag before you know it. They do not last that long, so my advice would be try and order as much as you can at the start so you've got a good healthy stock of compost, because I promise you, I go through buckets and buckets of the stuff. But if you are growing on a budget, do not pressure yourself into trying to buy as much compost because you think that you need that to grow food. You don't. It does benefit by feeding the soil and also replenishing all that nutrient that you've taken out from the year before. But if you are growing on a budget, like I said, use it for sowing the seeds and for trying to pot on and put a little bit on the top. But an inch is plenty, to be honest, if you put it on top of your no-dig beds. But at the start of your gardening season, I go through so much that I don't know if one day I'll ever finish buying compost. But let's go on to number 3, because that's where I talk about compost a little bit more. So number 3 on the list is buying yourself or building a compost bay. Now, whether or not you're using the black Dalek style compost bays, the stackable wooden ones that I've had for about 2 or 3 years now, or building your own by using some pallets. Now, I have actually got some pallets on site ready for this project. So I've managed to source some pallets on a marketplace. Now, look in your local area about pallets, or also some warehouses and also industrial estates. Make sure they're not treated ones. If you see them that they're painted blue or green, try and avoid those, because you don't want those in your garden because they've actually been treated and they're not good for the growing area. But if you can get some untreated ones like this, these will be perfect. You can stack 3 on the sides and then you've got yourself a compost bay. I'll be building a set of maybe 4 or 5 at the bottom of the plot later on in the season, but these are a great source of free materials or paying very little cost for them. And you've got yourself a compost bay. And now the good idea for these is that you can start taking off all your waste in the late spring and summer, piling it all in there using green and brown layers, and then hopefully by the next season then you've got a nice amount of compost in your compost bays to top dress your beds and save you from buying as much for the following year. That's the plan for me anyway. So number 4 on my list of things that you'll definitely need for spring is tools. Now, I know you're instantly thinking a spade, a trowel and a rake. Now, yes, they are all vital at the start of your growing season for starting off, getting all the ground ready and prepared, ready for spring. But there are other things, if you've got a growing garden or an allotment, that people don't think that you really need, but they are vital in my eyes, and that's cable ties, screws, a hammer and also a drill. Now, if you haven't got those things, I would highly recommend you looking into maybe not the drill so much, you can actually do with a screwdriver, but I promise you a hammer, some screws, some nails and cable ties will be your best friend in early spring and summer, and also through all the stormy weathers. Now, one of my best friends on the allotment is a cable tie. Now, I use cable ties for tying up nets, making teepee structures out of bamboo canes, and then putting our actual cable tie on the top and growing sweet peas, beans, peas, you name it, up them. Now, a few other people have said use string and twine, but I've always found we've got quite a lot of woodland area around here, and the birds come down at early spring and they start picking at the string to make nests in the hedgerows. So I've found that the actual structures then, when it gets windy, blow over, damaging my crops. So I actually use cable ties. Now, I know people will be saying that it's actually a waste of plastic, but I've started buying the reusable cable ties as well, and I'm going to be trying them out again now in spring, and hopefully they'll become one of those resources that I always get every year. But for me, cable ties are an absolute godsend because they're structurally strong and they just keep everything together, and the last thing you want in late summer is your bean structures all collapsing because of the winds and really putting stress on those bean roots. So cable ties, screws, nails, hammer, drill, you name it, you will definitely need it if you've got an allotment. So don't be fooled to think that nothing happens on your allotment apart from growing food. It's like a war zone sometimes. So next on the list is bark, wood shavings, wood chippings, whatever you want to call it, is this beautiful free mulch that I can source But if you have to buy it in, then make sure that you've got enough to try and mulch your paths, because the good thing about this is if you use concrete slabs, the downside of those is that slugs and snails will live under those slabs and crawl back up in the night time and eat your brassicas and all your delicate crops. But by using a nice bark path, this will also rot down in about 2 or 3 years time. This will be perfect material for mulching your beds and feeding that soil again. So bark paths to me is one of those things that I think if you've got other forms of paths on your plot, bark is a good natural resource that you can try and source. Maybe contact like a tree surgeon or a wood merchant around your area and see if you can get some of this stuff, because we're lucky we can get it for free. We really are, but I know other places struggle to get it. But bark paths for me in a growing garden is actually vital and really is a good resource to have, because it's free, like I mentioned, and also it's actually great to walk on. It's nice and soft and actually brightens up the plot in early autumn and winter, because it does get a bit dark. Now, if you can source bark, please don't think about filling up raised beds with fresh bark. That will actually eat out all the nitrogen in the compost that you put on top. My advice would be to use 2 or 3 year old bark to try and build up those beds. Use the fresh stuff on the paths, and anything old that you can source, that's okay to fill up the beds, because that'll be a nice brown resource. But the last thing you want to do is put fresh bark in a bed, mix it with compost. It will actually take out all the nitrogen out of that compost, which is actually what you need for growing those nice healthy plants, to try and break down that fresh bark. So don't put fresh bark into a raised bed. On top is okay. So if you're new to growing, or you've got extra space and you think, what can I put in that space right now? Think about getting some perennial crops like rhubarb, asparagus, herbs, all those things that will overwinter and actually continue growing year after year, so you don't have to keep replenishing your beds. Now, rhubarb, like I mentioned, and also asparagus are a good source because they last, honestly, they can last up to 20 years. Asparagus bed that I put in was actually about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm only now harvesting it. So if you like that fresh, crisp asparagus at the start of spring, think about an asparagus bed put in your plot, but it is an investment. Other things like Babington, Leeks, Welsh alliums, anything really that can overwinter and create free food year after year for your plot. So it doesn't always have to be hard work of you sowing seeds, growing it, eating it, and then you've got nothing to put in the beds. You can have perennial plots as well, where you have areas of your garden that just keep continually giving you food as well. So look into some perennial edible plants. That's a mouthful. Perennial edible plants. I'll pop a list here now of a list of some perennial edible plants that you can actually buy or source, or ask your gardening friends to split, like the rhubarb, and you can put it in your garden, and like you mentioned, it's free food year after year after year. So look into some perennial plants. Now, it doesn't have to be edible. You can actually buy perennial flowers as well and all. So if you'd like to put some perennial flowers in, like some bulbs and whatnot, then you can as well, to add some colour and some scent to your growing area. But my advice would be looking for some perennial edible plants if you're a new grower, because the last thing you want to do is at the start of spring be worrying about all the growing areas. At least some of them then are left to their own devices, and they can just carry on growing, and you'll have some free food later on in spring and summer. So next on the list is seeds. Now, make sure, if you haven't already ordered all your seeds, make sure you're doing that now. Check your seed catalogues, all your garden centres, and also go for all your seed boxes as well to make sure you haven't already got a seed. But for now, I would be looking through all my seeds, making a list of everything that you need for spring. Don't leave it too late, because some varieties will be out of stock. I've got some shallots here as well, which will be going in very, very soon. And also look at buying your seed potatoes now as well. Like I mentioned before, you want to get a good varieties. I would highly recommend Charlottes. They're an absolute beautiful new potato, and they're beautiful with butter smothered over in the early spring and summer. So get some Charlottes. And speaking of seeds, make sure you've got some seed trays as well. You want a module, or you'll want some form of tray to be sowing your seeds in. Whether or not you're buying them in, these ones are actually from Container Wise. This is about 1.5 inch, 2 inch square module cell, and there's 28 cells in this one. And this is a tray that I bought from B&Q. I think it was about £2, which sits in there purposely so I can actually bottom water. But you don't have to be buying seed trays. This one also is one that I bought, which actually comes with a little cloche on top. These are perfect. These are actually perfect. They're about 8 inches by 4 inches, and these are perfect for growing things in there, like a few lettuces and whatnot. But yeah, and they've also got the cloche on as well, so you can actually make it humid in there or increase the growing speed. So these are good as well for protecting them as well from frosts. But don't think you have to be spending money, because you can actually get free seed module trays, those flimsy green ones and the black ones from garden centres. If you go in and ask at the till, normally they will give you a pile for free. So don't think you do have to buy expensive module trays like this. These are an investment, like I mentioned, but you don't have to buy them. So don't think that gardening has to be really, really expensive. It really doesn't. You don't have to be buying plant pots. I asked a few gardening friends and they all dropped me some plant pots over as well, because these things can actually add up, you know, in cost. I don't mind buying the odd plant pot, but if friends have got a pile in their sheds or in their greenhouses that they just want to get rid of, and like I mentioned, garden centres as well and nurseries, go and ask them, because I promise you, they'll be happy to give you some free pots and trays. So yeah, like I mentioned, don't think it has to be really, really costly. I don't want you to start growing this year and thinking, oh my God, I can't afford to do this hobby. You really can. Like I mentioned, these are an investment. I've been buying these over the years, 1 or 2 at a time, sometimes 10 at a time, but you don't need them. You can actually grow very, very cheaply and still enjoy the process and have the excitement of growing food, just like the rest of us. So do not pressurize yourself into thinking you've got to spend all your hard-earned cash on just to grow some cabbages or a few sunflowers. Just enjoy the process. All the costs are obviously a luxury and an expense that if you want to spend, you can, but it doesn't need to be that way. So do not think that you have to spend all your money on gardening, because you don't, but it is addictive. So I'm going to be putting a few of these videos out for the next couple of months. It's mainly for the newer gardeners, the ones that have just starting, but also for gardeners to have a little reminder as well, because sometimes I get to March and think, why did I not think of that? Why have I not ordered that? Why have I not put that in place ready? Because you can remember everything. And if you're a new gardener or a seasoned gardener, yes, I said seasoned, you can remember everything. So make a plan, like I mentioned, and just get everything ready and set up for the growing season so you can enjoy as much as you can, because February, March and April are chaotic of having little seedlings everywhere. This whole polytunnel will be full. It's going to be like a jungle in here before we know it. So I'd rather use this time in winter now, where I'm actually quite relaxed and actually got plenty of time free to get ready for the manic seasons. But more importantly, make sure you enjoy the process and make sure you enjoy the gardening, because it's one of those things that can actually relieve stress, but also create some stress as well, because we over stress about having the perfect crop, the perfect environment, the perfect setting, that we can get everything right for them. Sometimes just let them get on with it, but helping them along the way is even beneficial to you, because you'll get better, stronger, healthier plants. So just enjoy it. I want to show you 2 pens that I use every single year, because every single year I see people having faded labels, complaining on social media and in the comments about how they wrote out all their labels, and then while they were watering or the sun bleached them, they can't remember what their plants are. So I use a black permanent Sharpie marker. I'll put a link for these in the description as well. I use this one here and I never ever have any problems. If you're using the white labels, use a black Sharpie permanent marker and I promise you, they won't come off. But then later on in the season, you can use alcohol gel or nail varnish remover, and this will actually take these off and you've got them good to go for the next year. But if you are using these black labels, now they are smarter, they are very sleek, and they also do last a bit longer as well. I've noticed that these ones don't degrade in the sun as much. They don't become as brittle. I use this white permanent paint marker by Pentel. Again, I'll put a link to this in the description. This one is extra fine, so yeah, I suggest you use this one and the black Sharpie, either one of these. These are like your #1 friends. When you're writing out your labels or writing them on pots as well, you can actually write them straight on the pots like this, and when you're watering, it's not running off, because be careful, because sometimes when you buy these black markers, they do supply a white pen with them, but the problem is it's just a chalk pen, and when you start watering with your watering can, the labels tend to run then as well, and you forget what's in each pot, and I promise you, you won't remember what's in that pot within a couple of weeks. So get yourself some good markers, and I'll put a link, like I said, to these in the description. And lastly, it's planning. Now you would think, I'm gonna wing it, I'm gonna hope for the best, I'm just gonna dig a bit of soil up, make a few raised beds and plonk some plants in and hope for the best. That's your first mistake as a new grower. If you are starting out, plan ahead, because plan for things that are coming on later on. Don't wing it. Make sure that you sit down at least one evening before you start growing and sit down and plan out what's going in that bed, what's going to go in next. So make sure that you sow it in accordance, maybe 6 to 8 weeks before you start harvesting that crop, so that you've got another plant to go in the bed, because you don't want to have bare soil, because bare soil will cost you money and crops. So make sure once you take something out of the bed on the same day, you mulch it back over and add back in another crop and continue using that bed as much as you can. Our seasons aren't very, very long in the UK. I'm at the zone 8B, which is in American terms, but try and use that amount of space and the amount of time that you've got efficiently. So make a plan, write a list, make sure that you've got everything you need at the start of the season. And like I said, make sure you've got things ready to go back in that bed once you harvest the next thing. And also filler plants as well. So if you've got little gaps or if crop fails in one particular area, you've got something else to go in there. And one of the best things to do is to oversow spring onions in module trays. I always got about 2 or 3 extra module trays of spring onions and lettuces as well, actually. And put them in your polytunnel, your greenhouse, or on your windowsill. And every time there's a little gap there, or maybe like a pest has come in and taken out one of your lettuces, at least you've got something to fill that gap up. And spring onions are a perfect thing. So order a lot of spring onions, because you will go through them, I promise. So I hope this list has helped you steer your way and get ready for spring, because it's an exciting time ahead. If you're new to growing, welcome to the experience. If you're a mature or seasoned gardener like myself, let's pray to God that this works this year, because last year wasn't as good as we hoped it to be. But this year, fingers crossed, we're going to have an amazing growing season. I'm Danny, and this is Grow Up.